Welcome to another edition of Talking Together. I'm Richard Sentner. With me today is Lee Roscoe, Ed Mangiafico, and Dr. Wall, Stephanie. I'm delighted to have you back, particularly Stephanie. It's been quite a while.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, today we're going to talk about revisiting the warning that Eisenhower gave us on his way out of office about the military-industrial complex. That's going to be our subject. So Stephanie, why don't you start us off?
Well, we began the 21st century with, well, I should explain what his warning was, I guess. Actually, Eisenhower in 1953 made a speech in which he warned about the military-industrial complex. And then in 1961, in his farewell address, he spoke about it and termed it really the wedding of the military, those who decide to make war, meaning the military itself, the president and the Congress, and those who make the implements of war, the weapons and all the materials that are necessary for war. And it's kind of a win-win situation for both of them, and a lot of money is made, and war is really quite a business. And he warned that this was not a good thing for our country, and in his farewell address, and that we should be very, very careful about democracy and what would happen to it if we continued on this path of rewards for both of those groups at the expense of both our, I think about our moral values, our country, and the money involved, which would be taken out of, and we see that now, which would be taken out of what is necessary for human interests and needs among the population. I think that things are a lot worse than they had been back in the 60s. Interestingly, that expression, military-industrial complex, was first mentioned some years before Eisenhower, and at that time it was called, in an American report, and it was called the military-industrial congressional complex. Right. And I think today we have a military-industrial congressional media complex. Okay. And I think all those things interplay, and I think that it's worse than it was during the Eisenhower years, much, much worse, and I think that we're heading now in a completely wrong direction.
Ed?
I'll add one more to that, which wasn't there in the beginning. The complex of military, industrial, congressional, media, and cultural complex. I think that one of the things that's interesting is it is true that that we associate the military-industrial complex with Eisenhower warning us about it and the development that has occurred since World War II, where it certainly has grown exponentially. But in fact, there's been a cultural development in America of a kind of macho imperialism that has bred the military-industrial complex and made it possible. That's covered, incidentally, very well in a book. As Richard knows, I like to show some books, and I'd show this one first. This is a book edited by Andrew Bacevich.
Oh yeah.
Andrew Bacevich, the Boston University historian, had 10 essays written by 10 different of the great American living historians on how we have developed to this position in empire at this point. And a great common thread in these essays is the growth of the sense of imperialism and the American right to dominate. And that breeds the military-industrial complex that we associate, of course, with Eisenhower. This is a great video for those who like that kind of thing. It's called Why We Fight. It starts with Dwight Eisenhower and builds on those who have who have come after him. It's followed by another film that's a necessary concomitant to it, I think, called War Made Easy. Because what we did since Eisenhower's speech is we made it very much easier to go to war and very much harder to avoid the growth of the complex. The first thing that they did, which I think was brilliant, was to ensure that the manufacture of armament was placed in every congressional district in America, so that it became very difficult for anybody to defeat it. I think the best example of that is Nancy Pelosi, when she was Speaker, while she was fighting for good bills as a good Democrat, she at the same day was fighting very hard for Lockheed Martin to produce in California a plane the government, the Air Force didn't want. So I think that that's an important thing for us to understand, that there's a cultural growth in America that made it easy to build an military-industrial complex. It was certainly in compliance with the media, fed on that imperialistic sense of American exceptionalism and our right to dominate. And you can go back to the Spanish-American War and the way we handled the Philippine Islands and go on from there, because it's all part of that great development. And Andrew Bacevich and the historians cover that very well. I don't think there's any question of the fact that the way they made it easy, by placing it in every congressional district, by putting the money behind it, is something that we'll talk about a little later. But I think as an introduction to my bias on it and where it will lead us, because where it leads us is to a condition of perpetual war, but I'll talk about that later.
Okay, Lee?
Yeah, well, I can kind of bring it up to the modern times. From the Monroe Doctrine to now, we've been expanding the military-industrial complex, and you can't not find it. For instance, today on Alternet, talking about drone surveillance of Americans, talking about the increase by the NSA of mining our data, talking about the total surveillance state that is the outgrowth, the inevitable climax of the military-industrial complex. We have the military-industrial complex has tried to control resources all over the world, and now we're going to bring it home to control the American populace as we, the 99%, become increasingly disaffected with the control of the 1%. And I just wanted to just read something, because today, May 1st, the Occupy movement is out all over the streets, and one of their great peeves, one of the injustices that they are protesting is the economic injustice that comes out of the military-industrial complex. And for me, I was thinking, why do I feel that the military-industrial complex we should be done with it, we should have evolved past it? Well, for me, and perhaps for the Occupy movement, which I can't speak for, I think that we are sick of an economic and political system which puts profits before people and the planet, which instead of providing for all of us a pleasurable life, creates economic pain, so that the most competitive, the most artificial, the most warlike, the 1%, can prosper at the expense of the rest of us. And today I woke up thinking, why should the only way be that corporate capitalist way, which creates inhuman humans, poisons the natural world? Why should it be that those who can't make it in this military-industrial complex, this narrowly defined corporate capitalism, be punished, it's a kind of economic torture to have to pay these hugely inflated prices for basic needs. And the reason, in part, is because the military-industrial complex has eaten up our resources, our economy, our treasury. The best brains have gone into producing, instead of devices that will enhance life, devices that destroy life. So we are in a state of economic torture. We have to pay for gas, food, information. We have to carry trillions of dollars of student and homeowner and health insurance debt because the military-industrial complex rulers wage their resource wars. We have to work our 60-hour week. We have to have 2 workers to a home to keep up because the military-industrial complex owns this country. It is the problem.
Okay. What I think I would like to do right now would be to kind of sketch very briefly how this all sort of came about. And it really goes back to World War II. And there were sort of 2 parallel tracks that were going on. The first one had to do with a study that was undertaken by the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the business input into American foreign policy, and the State Department. It was called the War and Peace Studies Plan. It went on during the war for about 6 years. It was basically how the U.S. was going to carve up the world once the war was over. They knew that they were going to be in a position of global dominance that the world had never seen before. When the war was over with, we had about half of the world's wealth. We controlled both oceans. We controlled both sides of both oceans. We had no enemies in sight. There's been nothing like it ever. And we figured if they did it right, they could take the whole world. And in fact, that was the real crime of the Soviet Union, was the fact that they had carved out a piece of the world that we couldn't get our hands on. So the idea behind it was that we would figure out who the natural leaders were in various parts of the world, and then we would build them up, and they would then be subordinated to us. In the Nixon administration, Melvin Laird, who was the Secretary of Defense, actually described it as cops on the beat, with police headquarters remaining in Washington. That was the general idea. And the other track that was going on was that they learned, because of the New Deal did not solve the Depression, but solved the Depression was the Second World War. And they realized that the lesson that they learned from this was that the federal government was going to have to get involved in the economy. And there were a number of ways of going about it, but the only one that made any sense for them was to develop a military system. It was the only one that made any sense. Because if they went, for instance, if they wanted to go down the social program route, they could build schools and community centers and health centers and all that, but that has a real drawback. That has a democratizing tendency. People are going to want to get involved. And it was very important that people not get involved, that the political class make the real political decisions. I mean, people can go and vote every once 4 years, that's fine. But we don't really want to get them involved. And that's how the Pentagon system works so brilliantly. You keep the people out of it. It becomes like a gift, to corporate capitalism. So you had these 2 tracks that were ongoing, and that's really sort of how it came into being. Now, what I would like to do is read an excerpt from a book that Chomsky wrote quite a few years ago, where he explains this system. He says, "It is not surprising that the government should turn to armaments in an effort to deal with such problems as flagging productivity and a deteriorating industrial plant. There are many predecessors for the choice of arms production and bribery of the rich as a means for dealing with economic problems. Most recently, the Kennedy administration program to get the country moving again by the device of military Keynesianism and regressive tax measures to stimulate investment. Government policy must be designed so that it does not interfere too much with the prerogatives and power of private capital, as it would were the state to become directly involved in the production of useful goods that could be sold for profit, but rather enhances them. The natural choice then is to subsidize the production of waste. In an advanced industrial society, this must be high technology waste, preferably rapidly obsolescing so that there is a continual need for more. Furthermore, the taxpayer must be induced to foot the bill. There are only so many times that people can be awed by the sight of a man setting foot on the moon, but fear of a powerful enemy can be an effective goad if the propaganda system is functioning smoothly. Furthermore, bribery of the rich, the only device to stimulate investment readily available in a state capital society, may lead to more consumption, real estate speculation, investment abroad, and so on, deferring the goal of reindustrialization unless a guaranteed market is provided. What is more, the goods produced should preferably not be total waste. Optimally, they can be employed to help maintain a global order open to investment and exploitation. There is one obvious policy choice that satisfies these and similar requirements, and it is the one regularly undertaken, what is euphemistically called defense. Any student of Orwell should have known what was coming when the War Department was renamed the Defense Department.
That's true. I feel like we're living in Orwellian times right now.
Yeah.
I really do.
You know, that's exactly right. And I think there was one more element in that conference you referred to, which I think is very important in our history, that I was just reading about recently. When we entered World War II, despite the fact that there was a strong isolationist movement at the time, one of the things we learned is that the way we won the war was by harnessing the manufacturing capacity, the ability to make planes and tanks and put everybody, while it solved also the economic issue in the country, and Chomsky's exactly right, it also taught us a lesson, that he who has the tools wins, and that made it very attractive to the idea of creating more of that kind of thing. I'd like to, in that line, recommend, there's a book that's a lot of fun to read for those interested in this, and it really picks up on what Richard is talking about. It's called, if you can zoom in on that, it's called Prophets of War. Prophets being spelled with a PH. It's the story of Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin was the beginning industry in the military-industrial complex in terms of dominating the manufacturing. They're the people that put plants everywhere. They're the people, and incidentally today, they're the people that have the largest share, not only of the Defense Department budget, but the State Department budget, as well as CIA and other organizations. They're the people that have a division that do the interrogations at Guantanamo Bay. The story of how Lockheed capitalized on the concept of more equipment, whether it was needed or not, is indeed a fascinating story and follows what you were saying.
And they're now turning that equipment, they own a good portion of the drone industry and the surveillance industry, against we the people, because now we are the enemy. We are becoming the enemy. And
they are the largest manufacturer of the drone, followed very closely, incidentally, by an Israeli company that is the #2 producer of the drone. Also Northrop Grumman and many other American companies. Well, they're all involved in it, but right. Lockheed Martin is gets the overall contract.
We should mention also that we spend $1 trillion a year on all this stuff.
That's right, it's a good point.
I mean, it's a huge amount of money
That's right.
when you think of it. And it's far more than we spent during the Cold War.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's interesting. In the Cold War, the big bugaboo was the USSR, and it failed not because of us and not because of our armaments and not because of our military buildup, but because they went broke trying to keep up with us. And now we're pouring, what recently I read, over $100 billion into Afghanistan.
No,
was it more than that?
Yes, well over
the figures are so astronomical of money being drained out of this country to kill people, to dominate the resources. You're absolutely right. And $3 trillion is the cost of the two wars, the Afghani and the...
And will be $4 trillion.
And the, yeah, well, Stiglitz and the other author showed us that proved, I guess, predicted, I should say, that it would be. Right now, we're over $1 trillion, but it's going to be by the time we take care of the 360,000 disabled soldiers that have come out of Iran, Iraq.
And this is always taxpayer money mostly. I mean, some of it's borrowed from China, I assume. I don't know the breakdown completely. Maybe
Well,
one of you do, but we're paying for this.
We are.
Incidentally, one of the great quotes that I like recently is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff appeared before the U.S. Senate Committee on the budget related to the Defense Department. Part of that $4 trillion, incidentally, is interesting, and he quoted it to begin with. The first thing we have to do, he said, is replenish all of the equipment that we lost in these two wars. So, of course, that continues the expenditure.
It's also important to point out that it isn't just the military end of this. It's also just about every part of our economy. Now, Nick Turse has written this book called The Complex. Yeah. And one of the things that he does in here is he gives a sort of portrait of a guy waking up in the morning and takes you through his whole day. And there's virtually no piece of clothing he wears, and there's nothing he touches for the whole day that doesn't involve a contractor for the Department of Defense.
That's
I
unbelievable.
mean, whether it's contact lenses made by Bausch and Lomb, who's a contractor, you know.
Sure.
And then he goes on to, he actually has a chart in here called The Pentagon in Your Pantry.
Wow.
And he goes through all the different products and the companies that make them. I'm not going to go through the products, but I'm just going to mention a few of these are all contractors. Nestle, Del Monte Foods, Kraft, Coca-Cola, Procter & Gamble, Dole, Sara Lee, Kellogg's, Nabisco, and on and on. He's got like 4 pages of these companies.
Well, if this doesn't convince you to eat local, to be a locavore, and to support your CSA, nothing wrong.
You know, one of the things that the other thing that chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said that I think we need to insert in here for people to be thinking about as we're talking, because it really hit me very hard when I heard it. He said, since we now have an all-volunteer army, we have recruited these people on the basis of war. And unless we can use them for war, we'll lose them, and we will suffer in retention.
And what does he mean by lose them? They'll be part of the prison population, which is now being enslaved, and is all part of the corporate.
No, he means
what did he mean
having
to
them
lose them?
continue to sign up is what he means.
Perpetual war, right?
Yeah, and that brings us to
keep
brings us to the way in which there's been this sort of militarization of our entire society, you know.
That's right.
And there are a lot of different tentacles to this, but certainly one of them has to do with sports.
I was going to say that. Yeah.
I mean, the way in which sports get you, to root for the home team and everything else, and that sort of serves you up to the Pentagon. So they wave a flag in front of your face, and you're so used to rooting for the home team, and now the Pentagon's the home team.
That's right.
But not only that, but at the sports events, or the military is there. The planes are flying over.
I've told this story many times, but I'll tell it again. For about 25 years, I used to go to the U.S. Open tennis tournament in New York, and they have like day sessions and night sessions. But the very first night, they have this celebration that is almost really difficult to take. It has the Marine Color Guard. It has these fighter jets flying overhead. They undrape an American flag that covers the entire stadium. And then comes the Star Spangled Banner, and it's just there's a kind of triumphalism about it. And that's just tennis, but you see this in almost every sport. I got an email this week from Paul Rifkin, who's involved with the Occupy movement in Falmouth, about what happened with the Pledge of Allegiance down in Falmouth.
Exactly, because the front pages today talk about how. Sorry, go ahead. I'll add it. The mere fact that this woman wouldn't use "under God" at the meeting when they were pledging to the flag made front page news, because half the town turned out saying that she was offensive to the warrior spirit of our brave fighting men.
Well, she didn't do the pledge at all at the meeting. That was the issue.
But I mean, to relate it
Yeah.
to militarism is exactly your
Sure,
point.
that's right.
That we're not respecting our brave warriors if we don't say the pledge and we don't say under God in the pledge. That's how diffused into the society this culture of militarism has become. And you can also, you see it in the kids' games, by the way. Let's not forget. I mean, we're a little older, but the kids are playing games that are appallingly
Video
violent.
They're
video
shooting,
games
shooting people all
that
over
are
the place.
militaristic games
Cutting their
that
heads
are, you know, showing this type of violence as something heroic, something to aspire to. Even as the Hunger Games, I don't know completely how they're, but the Hunger Games and popular kid stuff is kind of glorifying this militaristic violence.
Yeah, the thing is, I actually, I read The Hunger Games and saw the movie too, and I actually think that the author was after something much deeper than that.
Really?
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah,
my
You're
own opinion,
probably
my own
right,
opinion. But I think that she was trying to educate people about the problems of scarcity
I
and
think that's
poverty,
exactly
you know,
right.
and the lack of democracy and all that. And she was doing it by sucking them in this entertainment mold in the hopes that they would come away with something more than
That
just.
was the whole idea of the
yeah, I mean,
I didn't see the film, but
All
that
right.
was the book.
I
that
have not
was,
read it, so I'm.
Yeah.
Let me tell you how far this can go, and you're right. I think that yesterday I couldn't believe it, but if you look at the internet, there's a problem going on in Fallujah. Do you remember Fallujah? Fallujah.
Oh, of
Yes.
course.
Yeah.
I saw that too, and
You
it just
saw that?
yeah. Oh my God.
Was it Robert Fisk who had the piece about the hospital in Fallujah?
Yeah, and it was now the children are being born stillborn. They've been born with one eye and deformed in many, many ways, with parts of their body missing and what have you. Incidentally, we should remember that that very same thing was happening, started happening just 2 years after the siege of Gaza, because we were, in that case, we were able to pinpoint that it was the use of depleted uranium.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, Dr.
weapons.
Caldecott talked about the use of depleted uranium in Iraq on a much larger population than the Gazan population, and now most of the children, some huge percentage, which Dr. Wall can probably remember, are being born deformed.
That's
And it is the norm
Yep.
now in Iraq to have deformed children with
It is.
birth
Well,
defects.
It began in
Because
1992
of
with the Bush One war.
That's right.
Depleted uranium was used there. It's a radioisotope of uranium. It's what happens after they take off the uranium that they use for bombs. And it's a very, very hard material, and it's used to make tanks and to make armaments, the armaments like the armaments that are on the tanks. And following 1992 in Iraq, and also among the soldiers who had fought, there became, the children of our own soldiers who had fought, came a huge number of birth defects.
That's right.
And they started to see childhood leukemia in huge numbers. This is in Iraq.
Right.
And what happened to our own soldiers here was brought to the attention of the military.
That was actually Juan Gonzalez who broke the story here, and
Was it?
no one wanted to listen to him. You know,
Yes, that's
he's
right.
Amy
Yeah, Amy
Goodman's
Goodman's
co-head of
right-hand
Democracy
man,
Now,
yeah.
and he's a
Love it.
columnist for the Newark Daily News.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he was actually the guy that broke that story, but of course the Pentagon denied,
Yeah.
kept denying.
But
it.
anyway,
Well,
in
you know,
Fallujah they
Yeah.
use them, and now we're seeing, in Fallujah they use the same thing. And see, the uranium material is radioisotope,
Radioactive.
and it gets into the cells, and it gets into the germ cells, and when that happens, congenital anomalies.
That's what
may-
Robert Fisk has been writing about in this
That's right.
hospital.
Yes,
in
he
Fallujah.
has.
And
But it also
the
gets
only other thing I would add is if people really want to know how bad the assault in Fallujah was, the book to read is Jeremy Scahill's Blackwater. Because
Yes.
he has-
Oh,
he has
yes,
3
yes.
chapters
Yeah.
there on it, and if you get the paperback edition, he's actually has even more material in the paperback edition.
That was a wonderful book.
But yeah,
I think
know,
the other
there's-
thing that you got to remember is that's one issue. But and without going into the detail of them, look at all the other issues associated. Look at the number. Is it interesting to you that we have the media, talk about complicity of the media? you know, it didn't get much publicity, that we're losing more people in Afghanistan, more soldiers in Afghanistan to suicide than we are to military deaths.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Now, we don't
course.
talk about that now.
No.
So we've got the thing in Fallujah.
The
we've got
media
the
isn't telling us.
suicides.
Yeah.
We've got the mental health issues at home when they return.
There's a
We've
huge
got
amount of domestic violence.
domestic,
Yes.
yeah.
There's a huge number of suicides here on our own soil
right.
of the soldiers who are
Now,
returned.
in addition to that, we're using drones now, not just to target individuals, you know, maybe a terrorist,
But to
or think we did,
assassinate.
but what we call signature attacks, which are, look at this guy Tariq Aziz, who has a coincidental name.
Yes.
But
Right.
this is a guy who went to a peace conference, came back to Afghanistan, and his whole family was killed because they thought he was doing something suspiciously. You know, this is a kind
Well, I actually
of,
think that
a kind of arrogance.
this is an incident where you could make the argument that Obama is actually worse than Bush because
Absolutely.
Yes.
because
Absolutely.
in Bush's case, they killed a lot of people, but they also were capturing a lot of people, and the idea was they wanted to torture them to get information out of them and so forth and so on. But the Obama people are really not interested in capturing people. You know, they just want to kill them outright.
That's right.
Right.
I mean, there's all this triumphalism about killing bin Laden, but I think the assassination of bin Laden was just one piece of this whole assassination program that the Obama people have, and I think when you compare the two, that's actually worse than what Bush
Well,
was
I'm
doing.
not sure if it's worse because you see, when 60 Minutes sublets a whole hour to a torturer so that he can make excuses for his behavior, you know how far we've fallen into the clutches of militarism. We now have a kind of pervasive acceptance of torture and assassination. They're both equally as monstrous.
I'm not sure I agree with that.
And we still have rendition, and we still
I
have
thought the
secret
60 Minutes
prisons.
piece, I thought the guy was pretty well exposed in the 60 Minutes piece.
Yeah,
And
that's right, yeah.
I thought the interviewer for 60 Minutes did a very good job,
Very good job.
of countering the kind of things he was
Really?
saying. I mean, it's just my take on it, but I thought that he did not come across well at all on that.
I think there's one more book that I want to show, because this is a current book. As a matter of fact, it's #1 on the New York Times bestseller list right now. And this book, if you can zoom in on it, I think it would be helpful, is an easy read, well done, by Rachel Maddow, who does the, I guess it's the
News
Rachel Maddow
program,
news program.
her show, yeah,
Yeah.
on
MSNBC.
On
MSNBC.
MSNBC, and it's called Drift. It really is an unbelievable story of the military-industrial complex, how we got here. It covers all the stuff that Richard talked about. It covers the detail of how we are using it and how it has permeated our culture, and incidentally leaves you with the feeling that we've gone beyond the point of no return on the issue. I think that's a book I would hope that many people would read, and it's not unlike Andrew Bacevich's book, Washington Rules, America's Path to Permanent War, which covered much of the same
I'd
territory.
like to localize this issue, if I might, because it seems to me critical that we mention what's happening with the Pilgrim nuclear reactor in this context. Because as Dr. Caldecott recently pointed out, the so-called peaceful use of nuclear energy was actually part of the military-industrial complex's expansion of nuclear energy for militarization. And we are now right here locally facing the end result of this with the relicensing, potential relicensing of the Pilgrim nuclear reactor in Plymouth, which the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is pushing through ahead of the due date. And there we see the combination of energy, the military, our taxpayer money, producing a monstrous danger for the community. And the community has reacted and is doing something. There are 7 different towns which have a request to our legislature to intercede with the NRC on the warrant. I can, if Dick will allow me, I can actually read what towns those are. I have to find this. It may take me a second. You can talk while I'm finding it.
Well, we should know that while you're looking for that, we should tell everybody, and if they don't know already, that the Pilgrim nuclear plant is the same exact model as that which melted down at Fukushima.
Right.
And that it can happen here. I mean, we say it won't happen here, it's not going to be an earthquake, yada, yada. It can happen here. There's human error. There are design flaws in the nuclear power plant up there.
Concrete.
Yep, they've had all manner of problems. They're also spewing tritium, which is radioactive hydrogen, and carbon-14 into the bay, and they use the water from Cape Cod Bay and the waters off Plymouth to cool the material in the reactors, and then they put the water back. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And
500,000
I know.
gallons a day.
500 million gallons a day. We have, Massachusetts says that the plant releases the highest level of low-level radioactivity in the state. Is
Right.
there a correlation between the Cape Cod is downwind half the time. Cape Cod has the highest rate of breast cancer in the state. Is there a correlation? It seems to me there must be. Children are especially vulnerable to these radioactive isotopes, as you can talk about far better than I. It's an endless list. Do we need this? We don't. All it's doing is enriching the 1%. As you pointed out to me, it's taxpayer subsidized virtually entirely. When it's offline, we do not need the electricity. It's been offline for repairs, and we did not go dark. We pay more in kilowatt-hour rates because of the stranded costs, and probably have paid. Even Time magazine has said that the taxpayer subsidies to nuclear energy are out of control.
Yes.
Probably for a fraction of the price, we could have clean and green solar panels on every house in New England. The myth that it is green, that nuclear energy is green.
To me, one of the biggest aspects of this,
wrong.
with
I
regard
can
to
say
people
why.
on Cape Cod, is, what happens if there is an accident there? How would people leave
there's no
Cape
plan.
Cod?
There is no plan right now.
It's almost as though I actually mentioned this in the Occupied meeting last week, that remember the signs you used to see in the back of cars about the tunnel on Cape Cod? Taking the tunnel on Cape Cod?
Yes, I
It's
actually
almost
thought
as
there
though the
was
people in
one.
Washington think that tunnel really exists. So that's how they're going to get us off.
No, they don't want us to get off because they want the other
They want to
highways
get
for the
Plymouth.
evacuation of Plymouth.
It's interesting. They have a plan for like the 10 miles around, but if the damn thing spews, it's going to be
And
the whole,
it blows
the whole Cape is going to be uninhabitable.
Yeah.
Really.
Okay,
It
so
will.
you have a list.
I
of
do
the
have a
towns,
list.
right?
On May 7th, the town meetings in Mashpee, Eastham, and Brewster will have it on the warrant. On May 15th, Dennis and Harwich have it on the warrant. Provincetown and Truro have already voted and passed the resolution to ask our state and federal legislators to intercede to shut down.
But I think it's only fair for us to comment that we now know, because of Vermont Yankee, and I think the audience ought to be aware of that, that whatever the town says and whatever the state says, we've already had a court ruling that says it can be overruled by the Supreme Court sometime later, but right now the ruling is that it's a federal jurisdiction and the states have no authority to intercede. So
Well, isn't that the quintessential symbol for the military-industrial
Oh,
complex that we're
absolutely.
talking about?
Sure.
Isn't that
Sure.
the
Sure.
tyrannical foot on the necks of the
Sure.
people, where we can't move this beast even though we want to, even though the people say we want. We
I
want
just
this
want to
stuff.
say a couple of words about the medical effects.
Yeah.
What we've heard about.
Yes.
The same thing can happen here. We can have birth defects because the radioactive cesium-137, which has a 30 years half-life, that means half of it goes away or deteriorates in 30 years. 30 years, imagine that radioactive isotope should be around, being breathed in and being in the atmosphere. When it gets into cells, it can cause mutations, which can give rise to congenital defects and also to cancers, not right away, but remotely, 20, 30 years up the road, the incidence of cancer goes up, leukemias, all manner of organ cancers as well. And the immediate effect is another isotope is radioactive iodine, which can replace the normal iodine in the saturated in the thyroid gland, which is necessary for thyroid hormone production and so forth. And it's very important that everybody on Cape Cod, just in case anything does happen up there, gets potassium iodide pills from, I'll show you what they look like. You can get them from your fire station. They are available to the public. You can pick them up there. And if anything happens at that nuclear plant, everybody in your family should take these potassium iodide to protect the thyroid gland. A late effect of the radioactive iodine getting into the thyroid
And how long
gland
do they last?
is also, well, it only has an 8-day half-life. However, the incidence of thyroid cancer is increased in anybody who's been exposed. That happened in Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima will see
I
it
think
too.
while we're talking about that, I'd like to
Thank you.
piggyback on those two conversations and talk about Harold Simmons, because you know many people don't even know about Harold Simmons. Harold Simmons is a guy in Texas who has given more money to the Republican candidates for potential candidates for president than any other one person, despite all these billionaires that gave
More than
money.
the Cox, huh?
Yes, sir.
Really?
And he is in a very unique business. He is in the nuclear storage, nuclear waste storage
Yeah.
business.
Oh,
Harold Simmons.
isn't that interesting?
And Harold Simmons wants to build the largest nuclear storage facility in the United States. He has the land in West Texas. It's the size of 1,000 football fields. And he applied for the right to dig it down and make it for nuclear storage for instead of Yucca Mountain. And it was initially denied. This was way back in the Bush administration. He has gone to work on it, and he pushed hard with money for changes on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. 3 members of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission who resigned in part, they say, because of the pressure on Harold Simmons.
What does he hope to gain? What is his?
Just hold on. And Harold Simmons, therefore, it was reconsidered and has recently passed the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The reason it was rejected in the first place is that, interestingly enough, it resides over the, hard to pronounce, Oglala Reservoir. Oglala Reservoir, which covers from Montana all the way down and provides the drinking water for 1/3 of the United States.
God.
And is already being rapidly depleted.
And he wants to store this on top of that reservoir in West Texas.
That's so bad, it's funny.
Obviously, it will be enormously profitable because he will be paid for every rod that is stored.
Okay, good. And that there are over 3,000 rods being stored at
That's
Pilgrim
right, at
Nuclear
Pilgrim.
Reactor,
That's right.
and it was designed for only a couple of
500.
hundred.
And they
those-
should be in dry casks.
They should indeed, and
And
they
but it's in
also,
wet storage. It's
they
in-
now
It is.
said that they contain more cesium than was released at all 4 Fukushima reactors.
So
That's
why
all.
do we not hear more about? Why does the press not cause us to hear more about Harold Simmons and that nuclear storage facility, which incidentally there are pictures of on the internet, because he's now digging it down toward the reservoir.
God, that's absolutely appalling. Absolutely.
I don't understand how, I mean, I had a friend who was an Indian rights lawyer years ago. The late Lou Gurwitz died way too young. And he was so appalled by what the military-industrial complex was doing years ago that he said, I don't understand it. I simply cannot get my mind around why they are so destructive and self-destructive. You know, he wondered if they had made pacts with the devil, if they were, this is a perfectly rational guy. I mean, why? Why is it just greed? Is it just blindness? Is it, do they really believe?
They don't
No.
care.
No, I got to tell you.
really
No,
think that
I
they
got to
don't
tell you. I'm
care.
going to go back to the first book I recommended. These historians have one other common denominator, because this. Why is it called the short American century? Because we're at the end of the American century. There's nothing as incidentally as Eisenhower said. There. What was it? How was that quote? I love it. He said, "It is nowhere written that the American empire goes on forever."
Right, exactly.
And-
And they know that we're
and-
coming to the end of it, and they want to make
Basicich thinks
book.
it's over.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
It's-
They want to
it's-
make book before it ends.
That's right.
Oh, God.
Yeah, absolutely. They want to
That's
get their.
horrible.
Well, the only part of that I would disagree with is I don't think that they accept the fact it's coming to an end. I think they want to extend it.
Well, I think that's right.
But,
You're
but
really
we're not
right.
going to be able to afford it, Dick. Our economy is in the waste paper basket.
That may
at
be
this
true, but
moment.
that doesn't mean that they see it.
No,
that way.
no.
But they have the
Let me
think
come back.
tanks.
We have
to let you
massive,
know that it
massive
has.
debt
Yeah.
in this
How can
country.
they not see
Well,
the
but let me
handwriting
come back
on
to
the
that,
wall?
because from an attitudinal standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, you are right. They don't see it that way. They really believe in American exceptionalism and that it will last forever, and they want it to last forever. The difference is, though, that what we're doing, which is what I thought you were referring to, the kinds of things we're doing are suicidal.
Yeah.
We're bringing about the end. So, as Basevich says, the end is nigh. They don't see it that way, and that's why they're continuing to commit suicide.
Okay, well, this kind of raises another aspect which I wanted to get into briefly. And this has to do with Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine.
Oh, yes.
best book in the past 10
because she
years.
talks
Yes.
about a whole different complex, which she thinks is much worse than the military-industrial complex. So I just want to read her statement here. She says, the Bush administration immediately seized upon the fear generated by the 9/11 attacks, not only to launch the war on terror, but to ensure that it is an almost completely for-profit venture, a booming new industry that has breathed new life into the faltering U.S. economy. Best understood as a disaster capitalism complex, it has much farther-reaching tentacles than the military-industrial complex that Dwight Eisenhower warned against at the end of his presidency. This is a global war fought on every level by private companies whose involvement is paid for with public money, while the unending mandate of protecting the United States homeland in perpetuity while eliminating all evil abroad. In only a few short years, the complex has already expanded its market reach from fighting terrorism to international peacekeeping to municipal policing to responding to increasingly frequent natural disasters. The ultimate goal for the corporations at the center of the complex is to bring the model of for-profit government, which advances so rapidly in extraordinary circumstances, into the ordinary and day-to-day functioning of the state, in effect, to privatize the government.
Isn't this fascism?
That's perfect. It
Yes,
is.
it
Or
is.
Isn't
as
that
Norman-
Norman,
this is
That's
fascism. And I
fascism.
think we're really on the road to it right now, if we're
I-
not in
I
it
agree.
already.
I'm not sure that we're on the road to it. I think we're
We're
there.
here, yeah.
I think we live in a fascist state. People don't like that word because we associate it with Hitler and that sort of thing, but that's not really what fascism is. We are what, when a fascist state, which is defined as in the control of the financial interests of the country.
That's right.
Yeah, it was a marriage of corporations and governments bound up in forgive the word, but a bunch of faggots, meaning lit sticks,
Yes,
not
yes.
the derogatory term.
Well, I mean, I personally don't think we're in a fascist state yet. I can
We're
see
well
the
on the
contours
way
of it
if
coming,
we're not.
but I don't, personally just don't agree with that.
But everything's in place. We have the total
Richard and I have had that
surveillance
same problem.
state.
I
Yeah, we
think
do.
that,
We have the total
I
surveillance
think that what
state.
we're looking
We
at
have
here is
everything's in
kind
place.
of an extension of what there were a couple of economists who actually looked at the British Empire maybe a decade ago, and they did was they looked at the British Empire and they tried to figure out what were the costs of the British Empire versus what were the profits of the British Empire. And when they got done with their work, they concluded that, I mean, not to the penny, but more or less, the costs were essentially the same as the profits. And the question is, why do you have an empire if the costs are the same as the profits? And of course, the answer is that the costs are public. and the profits are private.
Oh, yes,
Right.
yes.
You know,
Yeah.
and so I think that that's what we're looking at here. Is
Yeah.
we're looking at as kind of an extension of that, and this is one of the reasons I think why
that's what
why
fascism
Chomsky
is.
has never believed that there was such a thing as the military-industrial complex, because he thinks it's just a system that we have. It's the entire system we have. It's like talking about corporate welfare. Corporate welfare kind of implies that you know there's a company here or a company there, but that's the system that we have. We've just seen a really extreme example of it. You know, the bailing out of these financial institutions to
horrible.
hundreds of billions of dollars.
But we want to cut back
But
Medicare.
the
We want-
principle's been there for quite a long time. I mean, this
Forever.
is,
It's part of
It's a
capitalism.
metaphor through which we can discuss this. I don't think that it's the total reality, but it's a way to start to look at it. I wanted to ask how you think the age of oil fits into this metaphor of the military-industrial complex, because I was thinking about the cars, the tar, the roads, the wars, the airplanes.
That's why we're in the
all
half these
this
wars.
is the blood of it. Does it
Well,
fit into
it's
this?
one of
it's
it.
actually,
It's one of it.
actually, Nick Turse actually talks about a petroleum complex.
Yeah, that's right.
And he talks about all the different airplanes and all the weapons that we use, and how it depends on petrol, you know, for their energy source.
But I think that's just one of the elements of the total complex.
Yeah.
I think that it's a big one, but it's one of them. I don't think there's any question of the fact that what you're really saying is that unregulated, in effect, uncontrolled rate or unregulated capitalism is what breeds this.
But militarism is the engine. Being in search of enemies is the engine, whether those enemies are Muslims, whether they are dissenters, whether they are communists.
Yeah.
It's the same
Or us.
engine to drive this profit, death for profit.
Yeah.
It's at its core, it's the government paving the way for capitalism. is what it
That's
is.
exactly
It's
what
this
it is.
marriage between the government and capitalism. So that, for instance, you know, with all of the mythology
what
about
fascism
the free trade agreements and
right.
and how we
Right.
believe in the free market and all that sort of
Right.
stuff, it's crazy. Because when it comes to the third world, we preach to them they have to follow the
Exactly.
dictates,
What we say.
you know, of the free market. But the United States doesn't follow those dictates, and they wouldn't do it.
Absolutely.
You know,
We're
if we
such
were
hypocrites. It's so
following
true.
the dictates of the free market, we would still be, you know, exporting furs to Europe as our main.
Incidentally, we also tell them that we believe in democracy, but we support their dictators.
Yes, yeah. No, that's a whole other area. And again, I wanted to localize it because the corporate complex, not the military complex per se, but the industrial, and now it should be called the technological post-industrial complex, the corporate post-industrial media complex is now at war on the environment again in Massachusetts. The developers who are part of this want once again to destroy the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act, and that's up for grabs again. I highly suggest you call your Congress critters at the state level and say no to S1854. Environmentalists have fought to maintain this state's biodiversity, its habitats, for 20 years, and have fought hard. There have been a lot of dedicated people being paid very little all over the place.
For the rest of us, right?
Yeah, exactly. And now once again, the corporate complex is trying to destroy laws that protect our local environment.
When we're thinking about, you know, overturning all of this, we really have to come to grips with the whole way in which corporate America controls our politics. You know, the role of money has changed everything. So it's not just a question of like calling your congressman. Your congressman is being funded by some
Your
corporation.
congressman is bought and paid for.
The congressman doesn't care. I have called so many times and nothing happens. I mean,
The state legislators are a little more responsive.
Project
I
number
think.
one is dealing with the whole financial system.
whole point
of
is
the way
that
in which
incidentally-
elections are controlled by corporations because they can spend as much money as they want. You know, and virtually every Congress, and even the most liberal ones, have some area where they're beholden to some corporation.
And
we need-
incidentally, if nothing else, because of their factory that is making guns in their district. But let me give you an example. I want to go back to what you said, because you said something very critical in terms of it. And I think one of the best examples for people to understand is the issue we're dealing with now in the United States Post Office. In 2006, the Congress of the United States, when the Republicans were there, decided that that we should privatize. You use the term privatized government, that they should privatize the post office. So what did they do? They required the post office to prepay the retirement benefits of 75 years in 10 years, which of course was a way of bankrupting them so that we could privatize them and take care of the retirement and get out of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And now they're saying, oh, they're not making a profit, so we're going to get rid of them. Recognize, incidentally, there's no tax money goes into the post office. So I think that's a great example of what you're talking about. But whatever it is that we want to talk about, and whatever name you want to give it, when the financial interests of the country, and I won't use the term, but if it is the financial interests of the country that control our legislature, our executive branch, and even our court system.
Yes, the court system.
And as a result, we don't have a legislative and executive branch. All you have to do is look at Obama, who makes a wonderful speech, but he's done some very terrible things.
Yeah.
So we have everything is bought and paid for. And when that happens, that's who the boss is.
And given that, there is now a move amongst the kids, amongst the occupiers, towards alternative economies. And I think this is really exciting. I mean, under this overlayer that controls everything, they're saying, let's rethink work. Let's rethink the structures. Let's communitize them. Let's go back to barter. Let's make small cooperatives. Let's look at the Mondragon cooperatives and other examples through the world and start to do that here. And that may be the only way to do it, is to grow new cells underneath.
Well, I don't think there's any one way.
Well, it may be a way.
That's a way.
There may be. We have to look at alternative ways.
But I also think that we have to do something about the way in which elections are funded. You know, all this money that's being poured into election by corporations. Something has to be done about that. We have to do something about.
Doing with Citizens
we have to
United.
do something about Citizens United. That has to be overturned. We have to get rid of the idea of money as speech.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you know, any
And
chance of
corporations
democracy is
are
just not going to
persons.
happen.
And corporations.
He had the one up.
Oh, we did have the one up? Okay. We're coming to the end here. Any last words, Stephanie?
Yes, I would like to mention, when we were talking about Falmouth and the troops and support the troops, I think that what did the troops, they say that the troops are fighting for free speech. And why isn't dissent free speech? You know?
Very good point. And,
Yeah.
and I personally think that the Pledge of Allegiance and the Star Spangled Banner are just implements to compel obedience.
That's right.
That's what it's all
Yeah.
about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ed?
All I can say is that I think it's incumbent on us to recognize where we are. And incidentally, one statistic we didn't give is that 50% of all of our money federally goes to the military-industrial complex in one form or another.
Okay.
Alternatives. Think of alternatives. Band together as communities. The system is broken. We need to create our own means of survival and prospering and fulfilling pleasurable lives amongst each other.
Okay, that's good. All right. Thank you all for being here. Until next time, do whatever you can for peace and social justice. Thank you very much. Welcome to another edition of Talking Together. I'm Richard Sentner. With me today is Lee Roscoe, Ed Mangiafico, and Dr. Wall, Stephanie. I'm delighted to have you back, particularly Stephanie. It's been quite a while. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, today we're going to talk about revisiting the warning that Eisenhower gave us on his way out of office about the military-industrial complex. That's going to be our subject. So Stephanie, why don't you start us off?
Well, we began the 21st century with, well, I should explain what his warning was, I guess. Actually, Eisenhower in 1953 made a speech in which he warned about the military-industrial complex. And then in 1961, in his farewell address, he spoke about it and termed it really the wedding of the military, those who decide to make war, meaning the military itself, the president and the Congress, and those who make the implements of war, the weapons and all the materials that are necessary for war. And it's kind of a win-win situation for both of them, and a lot of money is made, and war is really quite a business. And he warned that this was not a good thing for our country, and in his farewell address, and that we should be very, very careful about democracy and what would happen to it if we continued on this path of rewards for both of those groups.
For us to understand that there's a cultural growth in America that made it easy to build an military-industrial complex. It was certainly in compliance with the media, fed on that imperialistic sense of American exceptionalism and our right to dominate. And you can go back to the Spanish-American War and the way we handled the Philippine Islands and go on from there, because it's all part of that great development. And Andrew Bacevich and the historians cover that very well. I don't think there's any question of the fact that the way they made it easy, by placing it in every congressional district, by putting the money behind it, is something that we'll talk about a little later. But I think as an introduction to my bias on it and where it will lead us, because where it leads us is to a condition of perpetual war, but I'll talk about that later.
Okay, Lee?
Yeah, well, I can kind of bring it up to the modern times. From the Monroe Doctrine to now, we've been expanding the military-industrial complex, and you can't not find it. For instance, today on Alternet, talking about drone surveillance of Americans, talking about the increase by the NSA of mining our data, talking about the total surveillance state that is the outgrowth, the inevitable climax of the military-industrial complex. We have the military-industrial complex has tried to control resources all over the world, and now we're going to bring it home to control the American populace as we, the 99%, become increasingly disaffected with the control of the 1%. And I just wanted to just read something, because today...
Some books. And I'd show this one first. This is a book edited by Andrew Bacevich.
Oh, yeah.
Andrew Bacevich, the Boston University historian, had 10 essays written by 10 different of the great American living historians on how we have developed to this position in empire at this point. And a great common thread in these essays is the growth of the sense of imperialism and the American right to dominate. And that breeds the military-industrial complex that we associate, of course, with Eisenhower. This is a great video for those who like that kind of thing. It's called Why We Fight. It starts with Dwight Eisenhower and builds on those who have who have come after him. It's followed by another film that's a necessary concomitant to it, I think, called War Made Easy. Because what we did since Eisenhower's speech is we made it very much easier to go to war and very much harder to avoid the growth of the complex. The first thing that they did, which I think was brilliant, was to ensure that the manufacture of armament was placed in every congressional district in America, so that it became very difficult for anybody to defeat it. I think the best example of that is Nancy Pelosi, when she was Speaker, while she was fighting for good bills as a good Democrat, she at the same day was fighting very hard for Lockheed Martin to produce in California a plane the government, the Air Force didn't want. So I think that that's an important thing.
At the expense of both our, I think about our moral values, our country, and the money involved, which would be taken out of, and we see that now, which would be taken out of what is necessary for human interests and needs among the population. I think that things are a lot worse than they had been back in the 60s. Interestingly, that expression, military-industrial complex, was first mentioned some years before Eisenhower, and at that time it was called, in an American report, and it was called the military-industrial congressional complex. That's right. And I think today we have a military-industrial congressional media complex. Good. And I think all those things interplay, and I think that it's worse than it was during the Eisenhower years, much, much worse, and I think that we're heading now in a completely wrong direction.
Ed?
I'll add one more to that, which wasn't there in the beginning. The complex of military, industrial, congressional, media, and cultural complex. I think that one of the things that's interesting is it is true that that we associate the military-industrial complex with Eisenhower warning us about it and the development that has occurred since World War II, where it certainly has grown exponentially. But in fact, there's been a cultural development in America of a kind of macho imperialism that has bred the military-industrial complex and made it possible. That's covered, incidentally, very well in a book. As Richard knows, I like to show.
May 1st, the Occupy movement is out all over the streets, and one of their great peeves, one of the injustices that they are protesting, is the economic injustice that comes out of the military-industrial complex. And for me, I was thinking, why do I feel that the military-industrial complex we should be done with it, we should have evolved past it? Well, for me, and perhaps for the Occupy movement, which I can't speak for, I think that we are sick of an economic and political system which puts profits before people and the planet, which instead of providing for all of us a pleasurable life, creates economic pain, so that the most competitive, the most artificial, the most warlike, the 1%, can prosper at the expense of the rest of us. And today I woke up thinking, why should the only way be that corporate capitalist way, which creates inhuman humans, poisons the natural world? Why should it be that those who can't make it in this military-industrial complex, this narrowly defined corporate capitalism, be punished, it's a kind of economic torture to have to pay these hugely inflated prices for basic needs. And the reason, in part, is because the military-industrial complex has eaten up our resources, our economy, our treasury. The best brains have gone into producing, instead of devices that will enhance life, devices that destroy life. So we are in a state of economic torture. We have to pay for gas, food, information. We have to carry trillions of dollars of student and homeowner and health insurance debt because the military-industrial complex rulers